Hello everyone, welcome to the U.S. Immigration Hub. A historic turning point in U.S. immigration policy. Today we are witnessing a historic turning point in the world of U.S. immigration policy. The Supreme Court of the United States has just issued a landmark ruling that has already been described by legal experts, immigration lawyers, and countless families across the country as a true game changer. This decision is not just about technicalities in law. It has the potential to impact the lives of millions of people living in the United States, both citizens and immigrants alike. The background of the case. To understand this ruling, we first need to go back and examine the background of the case. The case before the Supreme Court centered on a fundamental question: who gets to decide how immigration laws are enforced? The debate revolved around the federal government's authority to set enforcement priorities. Should immigration officers treat every single undocumented immigrant the same way under the law? Or should the government have the power to prioritize who should be targeted first for removal? For example, imagine an undocumented person who has committed a violent crime. Should that person be treated the same way as a mother of two who has lived in the U.S. peacefully for over 15 years, working, raising her kids, and staying out of trouble? The government argued that enforcement priorities are necessary to make the system fair, effective, and humane. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government does indeed have the authority to set and enforce its own immigration priorities. But there was an important caveat. Constitutional protections must always be respected. This means, due process, fair hearings, and accountability remain non-negotiable. Breaking down the ruling. So what exactly does this ruling mean? In practice, the court made it clear that the government cannot enforce immigration laws in ways that violate the Constitution. Immigrants, even those who are undocumented, are still entitled to basic rights, such as due process and fair hearings. This ruling essentially sets the standard that immigration enforcement must be both fair and humane. The focus should be on genuine threats to public safety, not simply hard-working families who have lived quietly and peacefully in the United States for years. In other words, immigration enforcement must strike a careful balance between justice and security. For years, advocates have argued that enforcement should not be about creating fear in immigrant communities, but about ensuring fairness in the system. The Supreme Court has now validated that principle. The immediate effects of the ruling. The decision will have immediate ripple effects across the immigration system. Removal proceedings. Undocumented individuals who are in the system still have the right to a full legal process before deportation. That includes hearings before an immigration judge, the right to legal representation, and the ability to appeal decisions. Fast-track deportations without proper hearings are less likely to move forward. Enforcement focus. Immigration enforcement agencies now have stronger legal backing to focus their limited resources on high-risk cases. This means that individuals who pose genuine threats such as serious criminals or national security concerns will be prioritized for removal. On the other hand, families with U.S.-born children, long-time residents with no criminal history, or those who have integrated into their communities may be considered lower priorities. Deferred action programs. Although not the main issue of the case, the Supreme Court also affirmed that the federal government has discretion to manage programs like DACA. This doesn't automatically expand protections, but it creates space for potential future changes or restorations if the government chooses to act within proper legal procedures. Short-term changes you can expect. While this ruling is a major shift, changes won't happen overnight. Immigration lawyers are already warning people that the implementation of these new guidelines could take weeks or even months. In the short term, we can expect deportations that were previously fast-tracked to slow down. Agencies will need to revise their policies, retrain staff, and update procedures to make sure they comply with the Supreme Court's guidance. This means that non-priority cases might face delays or be set aside temporarily. In some cases, individuals who were previously denied rights or hearings may be able to reopen their cases. However, this is not automatic, and every situation will depend on individual circumstances. That's why now, more than ever, it's important to consult a licensed immigration lawyer if you have a pending case. One mistake could change your life forever. What the decision does not do. There's already a lot of misinformation floating around about this ruling. So, let's set the record straight. This decision does not automatically grant legal status to undocumented immigrants. It does not change visa quotas, green card eligibility, or the rules for applying for U.S. citizenship. It does not open the borders or end immigration enforcement altogether. Deportations will still happen, but they must happen in a way that is consistent, fair, and within the law. What this decision does is reaffirm that the immigration system must operate under constitutional standards with due process at its core. Public reaction across the nation. As with many immigration issues, the public reaction to this ruling has been divided. Immigrant advocacy groups are celebrating the decision as a long-awaited victory for civil rights and due process. They see it as recognition that families deserve fair treatment, and that the government cannot simply act without accountability. On the other hand, critics argue that the ruling could slow down enforcement efforts, encourage lawsuits, and make it harder to remove individuals who are here without authorization. Some fear that this ruling could be misinterpreted as leniency. But despite the differences, there is one point that both sides agree on. Comprehensive immigration reform is urgently needed. This ruling is significant, but it doesn't fix the larger system that many argue is outdated and broken. What comes next? Looking ahead, this Supreme Court ruling could become a catalyst for broader immigration reform. Congress may feel renewed pressure to revisit stalled proposals and create legislation that provides clarity, consistency, and fairness in immigration law. Meanwhile, immigration agencies will begin adjusting their policies to comply with the decision. These adjustments may take time, and during this period, confusion and delays are almost inevitable. The immigration debate in the U.S. is likely to grow louder and more urgent in the months to come. Here on our channel, we'll continue to track every development and keep you informed with accurate, up-to-date information. What you should do right now. If you or your family are affected by immigration proceedings, there are important steps you should take immediately. Stay aware of all developments and make sure your documents and records are updated. Attend every single hearing and appointment. Missing one could have serious consequences. Most importantly, consult a licensed immigration lawyer about your specific case. Do not rely on rumors, social media speculation, or unverified advice. This ruling has created opportunities, but every case is unique and should be handled with expert guidance. This Supreme Court decision is historic, but it is not the end of the story. It does not solve every problem within the immigration system, but it does provide hope for millions of families and individuals who simply want fairness, dignity, and justice in the process. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.